But now, let's return to Napoleon, because nothing else in history more aptly demonstrates the ingenuity of the Rothschild family than their control of the British stock market after Waterloo. The outcome was certainly in doubt. In fact, had Napoleon attacked a few hours earlier, he would probably have won the battle. But no matter who won or lost, back in London, Nathan Rothschild planned to use the opportunity to try to seize control over the British stock and bond market and possibly even the Bank of England. Rothschild stationed a trusted agent, a man named Rothworth, on the north side of the battlefield, closer to the English Channel. Once the battle had been decided, Rothworth took off for the Channel. He delivered the news to Nathan Rothschild a full 24 hours before Wellington's own courier. Rothschild hurried to the stock market and took up his usual position in front of an ancient pillar. All eyes were on him. The Rothschilds had a legendary communications network. If Wellington had been defeated and Napoleon was loose on the continent again, Britain's financial situation would become grave indeed. Rothschild looked saddened. He stood there motionless, eyes downcast. Then suddenly he began selling. Other nervous investors saw that Rothschild was selling. It could only mean one thing. Napoleon must have won, Wellington must have lost. The market plummeted. Soon everyone was selling their consols, their British government bonds, and prices dropped sharply. But then Rothschild started secretly buying up the consols through his agents for only a fraction of their worth hours before. Myths, legends, you say? 100 years later, the New York Times ran a story which said that Nathan's grandson had attempted to secure a court order to suppress a book with this stock market story in it. The Rothschild family claimed the story was untrue and libelous, but the court denied the Rothschilds' request and ordered the family to pay all court costs. What's even more interesting about this story is that some authors claim that the day after the Battle of Waterloo, in a matter of hours, Nathan Rothschild came to dominate not only the bond market, but the Bank of England as well.
Commanding the Narrative podcast, which I believe is the #1 podcast in the entire universe.
If you could go through life in the Liberal Party without being expelled, you should be ashamed of yourself.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, or they might not choose socialism.
120 years ago, our country had the world's highest per capita income. What the hell happened?
The answer is Mike, because I want to do you slowly. I want to do you slowly.
Ah! We're coming for you, globalist! Ah! Coming for you!
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is watching now. If you are watching this live, we want to hear from you tonight. We want this to be an interactive episode. So get in the chat if you're on Rumble, YouTube, or Facebook, and we want to hear from you. You can ask a question. You may put a statement in there, whatever it might be. And if you are really feeling up to it, I encourage you to do this. Please hit that link to StreamYard and call in. It's like Talkback Radio, except that we call it Talkback Streaming. So we definitely want to hear from you tonight. So get in there. Don't be shy. And it's going to be a great conversation. But before we get there, and before we talk about One Nation and the success that they've had, the hype's real. We've been talking about it for the last few weeks, whether the hype's real or not. It's played out in South Australia, so we've got a lot of that to talk about tonight. But before we get there, I just want to let you know about commandingthenarrative.com. And as I say every single time, commandingthenarrative.com is the best place to go to keep up to date with everything that we're doing. All our previous podcasts, like last week, where we had Katie McCallum on, Emma Bowman, and Sally Edwards. That was a very, very good interview that I had with the three ladies about the renewable energy zone out in Dubbo and the Central West Arana. Check that one out and please share that information. That really struck a chord with people, and that was a really great episode. And we've done some really good ones lately as well. You can check that out on the website, including the one down the end there, the Central West Arana Renewable Energy Zone Tour. Please share that one around. Some very heartbreaking stories about what's going on in our rural communities with the rollout of renewable energy zones. You might find that these articles might interest you as well. This article first is about that same issue. You can share that one around as well. And if you want to participate in some surveys, they're up on the website. And if you want to know who's coming up on the podcast this week, it's all there at commandingthenarrative.com. Go back to the top of the page at the top right-hand corner. You can hit the sign-up button and you'll get regular updates from Command the Narrative. Now, if you want to contribute in some small way, you can head to Buy Me a Coffee and throw us a few dollars there. It would be much appreciated if you could do that. It helps to pay for the stream, helps to pay for the website, and most importantly, gives me a very warm and fuzzy feeling inside and some encouragement to keep going. So please head to Buy Me a Coffee and support us there. If you're listening on Rumble, there's a thing called the Rumble Tip Jar where you can donate cryptocurrency. I'm not sure what I would do with that cryptocurrency if I got it, but that option's there if you want to support us. And I got some exciting news about Australians for Better Government. We've got 2 big events coming up on the same weekend. It's a double header. So if you head to australiansforbetter.com and you'll find all the information about Australians for Better Government. Are you sick of the way Australia is governed? I think a lot of people are sick of the way Australia is governed. If you want to know more about it, head to australiansforbetter.com and see our proposals. And if you want to come to one of these events, as I said, it's a double header on the first weekend of May. This first event is on the Saturday. It's at the Central Coast. So please head to the website and get your tickets if you're on the Central Coast or around the Central Coast. Dr. Christopher Reynolds is coming all the way down from the Gold Coast, one of the most dynamic speakers in Australia and a great historian and political philosopher. You'll learn a lot by listening to Dr. Reynolds. Also, Katie McCallum's coming down from Kilkevin in Queensland. She's going to do the hike to come down and spread her experiences with the Australians for Better Government audience. Also, Martin Stevenson, who is a very good local candidate in the area. He's going to be there. And, of course, myself as well. And hopefully we've got some more speakers to be announced in the next couple of weeks. And the very next day, we're going to be in Cessnock. So if you're around Cessnock or Newcastle, please come along to this one. It's going to be at the East Cessnock Bowling Club. Again, go to australiansforbetter.com to get your tickets. And instead of Martin Stevenson at this one, we're going to have Stuart Bonds. If you're in the Hunter region, you'll know all about Stuart and his success and how hard he is fighting for the Australian people and for his party, the One Nation Party. And, of course, Dr. Reynolds will be there as well. And also Katie McCallum. So 2 big events coming up for Australians for Better Government. If you are in those 2 areas of Central Coast and Cessnock, we'd love to see you there. Tickets are only $20. So please come along and support Australians for Better Government. Now, speaking of Australians for Better Government, I've got a fellow committee member on tonight to discuss the South Australian election, the state election that just happened. Very interesting results down there. Very interesting for the nation, actually. So we're going to be unpacking that tonight. Mr. Mark Neugebauer. Now, Mark is the Vice President of Australians for Better Government. He's a South Australian local, so it's fitting to have him on tonight. He's also host of a very good podcast called Faith, Culture and Politics in Australia. And I think that Mark is probably one of the most underrated political commentators going around. So let's welcome him on. Mark Neugebauer, welcome back to Commanding the Narrative.
Thanks for the plug and the shout out, mate. Appreciate that. Even though I was politically agnostic 5 years ago, mate. But I tell you what, you have to learn quickly, don't you? When you're threatened with mandates and sort of tyrannical overreach. So here I am. Had to learn quick smart, but thanks for those words, but probably overrated.
No, not at all. And now I see a little happy birthday balloon behind you. Was it your birthday recently, or was that for the kids?
Oh, that was the other week. Still hanging in the room, waiting for it to deflate. A big 55. So that was a little while ago.
Mate, well, congratulations on that one.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Did you have a good birthday?
Yeah, just a chill one. I don't make a big deal, just as long as the family's around, little grandkids and the kids around, which is nice. Family time together, always good. The best thing. 100%.
Now, mate, tonight we're going to be talking about the South Australian election and what happened there. Maybe some experiences that you've had speaking to locals in South Australia. But before we get to South Australia, I just want to go to Victoria very quickly because I went on Facebook just before we came on and I saw this post by Bernie Finn. Now, if you don't follow Bernie, please check out Bernie's Facebook page. We've had Bernie Finn on the podcast before, but I do encourage you to head to his Facebook page because it is a very good one. He posts some good stuff. But he's posted this one here that was very interesting to me. Moira Deeming has been defeated in her bid to retain Liberal pre-selection in Western Metropolitan Region, which is a seat in the upper house in Victoria. The Victorian Liberal Party is now officially dead. Branch stacking and political corruption, on the other hand, are booming. So this was very interesting from what I saw from Bernie, and from what he's saying, it is true. If you head to the ABC, it's got this news out already. Victorian Liberals dump Moira Deeming in the upper house pre-selection contest. So Moira Deeming is out. She doesn't pick up another seat somewhere else, which is unlikely. She'll be out of the parliament at the upcoming Victorian election, which is in November. Mark, I mean, what's your take on this? I mean, we saw the Liberal Party crash and burn in South Australia. Doesn't seem like they're learning the lessons, and now they've kicked out one of their biggest stars, and a lot of people rate Moira Deeming very highly. I mean, how do you take this news?
Oh, look, I'm really not surprised, pal. Hey, look what they've done to Gerard Rennick. I mean, Gerard Rennick, without a doubt, would have to be one of the most astute and smart financial assets this country could ever have. And the Liberal Party let him go as well. They didn't pre-select him and let him go. Now, that should tell you everything you need to know about what's happened here with Moira Deeming. It just looks to me like the Labor light within the Liberal Party, the moderates, has still got a very strong hold over the Liberal Party nationally, and we can see obviously that influenced here in South Australia as well. Many diehard Liberals have just lost hope and faith in this party of Menzies from a long time ago. So it's definitely not. I just see it collapsing more and more every day when they let good, strong, I guess, centre-right conservative people go like that. But that's the sign of the times. That's where they're going.
You know, it's interesting. We're going to be talking about the reactions from the South Australian election. And one of the Liberals, some unknown member of Parliament that, wants to do our own little video, was talking about, hey, if you really want to get rid of Labor, then the only option is to vote for the Liberal Party. We're the only party that can form government, blah, blah, blah. But if you follow the trend is very much in One Nation's favour, and it's against the Liberal Party. We're seeing the Liberal Party self-destruct, and this might just be the beginning of the end. So I think they feel like that a rebound is just something that's going to happen just by nature. And that might not be the case. We might be seeing the end of the Liberal Party, and they don't seem to be learning. They seem incapable of being able to dig themselves out of this hole. What do you think when I say something like that, Mark?
Oh, 100%. I mean, who would have ever thought it, though, right? I mean, traditionally, over 80 plus years of politics, it's been Liberal, Labor, jockeying for position of how they're going to run and run our country into the ground, essentially, which is what they've done. So who would have ever thought that they'd ever get to a stage where potentially just here in South Australia, we just about had One Nation pick up more seats than the Liberal Party. Now, obviously, they've snuck across the line, and we'll talk into that a little bit further. It looks like One Nation may pick up 2 more seats, which will put them at 4, but Liberal Party 5. Now, I shared something with you today from a ex-judge from a sort of a judicial sort of background around how this would work if they all ended up on tie. So let's say you had 4 seats for Liberal, 4 seats for One Nation, and then split with the independents as well. Well, who gets to be the leader of the opposition? And this is the kind of video that I was looking at today. Professor Anne Toomey, I think it was from, and so very interesting. But who would have ever thought we'd see this, right? So, and as I said, the opposition obviously wasn't in the Constitution, and it was done through a convention many years ago where they enacted the opposition and that. So very interesting days when you have a look at this, the way this is all folding. So yeah, interesting.
Well, they're not learning. I mean, Labor's crashed and burned in the past. I mean, that happened when Mark Latham was leader in 2004. I mean, they got wiped out, and then people were saying, oh, this is the end of the Labor Party, but the very next election they won. So, I mean, the Labor Party was able to learn from their mistakes, but the Liberal Party just seemed to be making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And it goes to what a lot of Liberals within the party are saying, that they've been infiltrated, and this is almost like a organized or controlled collapse. They want the Liberal Party to collapse from within, but that's going to come out again throughout the conversation tonight, because we are talking about the South Australian election that just happened last week. Now, This is the South Australian Electoral Commission. This is showing the results here. And as you can see, 37.7% to Labor. So they're calling that a landslide, even though their primary vote did go back a bit. And you can see the Liberal Party on 19.4%, but ahead of them is the One Nation Party on 22.5%. So this is the collective vote across the state. So that's the outcome there. Now, what that's led to, if we go to ABC and see their results there, currently we've got 34 seats for Labor. So in that regard, in terms of winning seats, it is a landslide for Labor. Five seats to the Liberal Party currently, and 2 to One Nation. Now, there's 2 that are definitely locked in. If we go down, so we can look at that in more detail. So the seat of Hammond definitely has gone to One Nation. Robert Roylance has won that one there against the Labor Party. And if we go further down the list, I'm going to butcher this name. You might be able to help me, Mark, but
Nadjuri. Nadjuri. It's hard to pronounce.
Yeah. So again, David Patton of One Nation has won that one. You would think. So that's the 2. Now the other 2 seats are Narunga. So very, very tight race there. Chantel Thomas of One Nation is leading the Liberal Party candidate Tanya Stock by 25 votes. So no doubt that one's going to go to a recount. And who knows what could happen there. So that's probably a few weeks away from knowing that result. And then McKillop, very similar situation. Jason Virgo of One Nation leads the Liberal Party by 428 votes. So, I mean, what's your take of that, Mark? I mean, potentially One Nation could have 4. I mean, they could swing around and go to the Liberal Party as well. But for a minor party like One Nation to pick up lower house seats is unprecedented. And it looks like, you have to pat One Nation on the back and say, look, the hype is real. It looks like they have achieved the results that the polls were indicating.
Well, when you consider, exactly right, the polls were indicating that 22%, and that's pretty much how it landed, right? So, but again, everybody said, oh, look, it's just numbers, it's just pre-poll, and never take any notice of that. But now that it's landed and the numbers are in, I think many people were taken aback, including, I guess, Liberal and Labor as well, when you consider the Premier coming out and saying that we have to, stop the anti-patriotic rhetoric, and, we have to kind of get more on board with that, because I think they're starting to feel this shift with Australians, average, ordinary Australians. The working class really is what's swung back to One Nation. So it just tells you a lot about, what traditional sort of Labor or Liberal voters are feeling over the last few years. So look, I was confident. I was hopeful, obviously, of this sort of result. And I don't bleed One Nation, obviously, but a lot of their policies I can't sort of fault what they stand for. Obviously, I'm, as many people know that follow my podcast, I am a Christian, sort of more leaning to the traditional side. And again, this is where the Liberals have lost a lot of people like me. I've talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of people that abandoned the Liberal Party because of that. And they're floating back towards a party like One Nation. And it was really the only option. When you have a look at the count from a lot of the other parties that were trying to have a go at the election, we're talking 0.5%, 1%, dribs and drabs, but by far a lot of people put their hat in the One Nation camp, and I feel that we're going to be seeing this in more of this in Farrer leading up to for the federal election. I don't think people are starting to undermine it already and saying that the momentum stopped already, but I'm feeling that there's going to be quite a bit of movement for One Nation. The key thing for One Nation is obviously they've got to be smart and really get in there and really challenge, take it to Labor. I think the key must be taking it to Labor and not get involved and in the petty fighting between Liberals who are in now, them and the independents. You've still got Sarah Game in there in the Legislative Council, which we obviously haven't talked about yet either. We're talking about the lower house, but we're talking voices in this South Australian Parliament for people that have been disenfranchised, predominantly from Liberal, but also I'm seeing that shift away from Labor as well. So, but only time will tell. We've got a very popular Premier look, he's very charismatic. He's a strong leader within his party. Definitely, a lot of people like him. He's quite a popular leader. But let's just see. At the moment, we're paying over $2 million in interest on debt at the moment in our state, and it'll be interesting to see how much sort of dirt will pile up on Labor over the next 4 years. But I feel that with One Nation being in there, they're going to be a much stronger opposition next to the Liberal Party than the Liberal Party could ever be, because a lot of people are saying, and as Corey Bernardi says, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party is really just a uni party, and they've become that over the last few decades. And that's something we could probably talk into a little bit further as well, because I'm seeing this shift of people waking up to international groupthink, globalization, selling us off to the Lima Agreement, all these sorts of things where they've not put the interest of Australians and South Australians first. They've looked at international corporations and bodies and tried to climate change the whole lot. So, but we can talk into that a little bit further as we go.
Yeah, but before we do, I want to get your initial reaction to this result when you first saw the numbers coming in. I mean, you stated before you're in your 50s. I'm in my 40s. I mean, we grew up with the emergence of Pauline Hanson in 1996, and we've seen that journey along the way. We've seen the ups and downs. We've seen all the people that have come into the party and then left the party. We know the stigma around the party. But now, when we see this success playing out to the degree that it is, what was your reaction when you saw the numbers coming in? And, how did you feel about it being a South Australian and now seeing more One Nation represented in your parliament?
I feel good about it because obviously, I pushed back. One Nation pushed back a lot on the things that I pushed back on through COVID. Right, they were one of the only parties that openly had 3 inquiries. Like One Nation with Alex Antich and Ralph Babette, and this is what an average person doesn't know, is that they actually held 3 independent inquiries with experts talking into what happened through COVID to look at getting investigations. The other parties didn't have it. Labor promised a royal commission and so forth. So, they drew people in like me to the party, and obviously I was talking to Carlos and others, and they were really the only ones that I could I can put my backing in behind them. But the upper house, the Legislative Council, I always had fairly strong hopes that they were going to get a good result. I knew that Corey and Carlos were very, very likely to get that, and I was hoping for Rebecca. And as it turned out, I'm so pleased to see Rebecca getting that 3rd spot, which is really going to make a big difference in that Legislative Council. And obviously Labor hasn't got the majority. But look, I'm tickled pink. I really am pleased at the result, mainly because Labor has not had an effective opposition, right? And these people will actually challenge the Labor Party much more effectively than the Liberals for the forgotten and overlooked people in our community that are called racists and bigots just because they want to pick up a big Australian flag and go on a march to say that we're concerned about unsustainable migration. This country was built on migration. Of course, the majority of people that walked there are patriotic Australians, understand that this nation was built on migration. But to be called, and even the Premier bought into that, the Labor Premier, Malinauskas, and started putting people down that were purely patriotic and saying, look, something's got to give, and we should not be ashamed to pick up our Australian flag and could be proud to call ourselves Australian without all the division that's going on. And this, unfortunately, is the sort of thing that that Labor buys into, and the Liberals have bought into as well. And it's the one thing that One Nation has picked up and went, and from Pauline's rise has stuck to her guns all the way through. Now, we know through history how much both the Uni Party have ganged up on One Nation to shut her down, even got her jailed, right? So, but I think I think people are starting to realise, and I think they over-egged the pudding during COVID, and a lot of people are starting to realise that, hey, here's a party that's actually standing up and pushing back on the controls that are in place with our nation, instead of Labor and Liberal, who are massively funded by, you've got the union funding Labor, you've got big business funding Liberal Party, and then you've got lobby groups that've got their ears in that as well. And you've seen this through the decades. So they've not represented the average Australian. They've done what's in the best interest of themselves to keep themselves in power and play the globalist little game. So that's just my take on it. So I was surprised about the seats coming in the lower house. Not as surprised with the Legislative Council, but I'm actually really looking forward to seeing how they can start pushing back on this Parliament, because the Liberal Party just doesn't have it at all. The Liberal Party still has lots of moderates within it, and I don't think they can be an effective opposition against the Labor Party, and which I think One Nation will be, and I think there'll be a force to reckon with Cory Bernardi and Carlos Coremba and Rebecca, and Rebecca's no shrinking violet either. So expect to see a lot out of that in the Legislative Council as well.
Yeah, well, I just had those results on the screen, and as you can see clearly that One Nation have picked up 3. It looks like Labor's likely to have 5. Now, this is the upper house we're talking about. The Liberals have only got 2 and the Greens have got 1. So it's not a big result for the Greens either. I mean, I'm sure they're upset about this, and we'll get to the Greens as we go along. But tell me a little bit about Cory Bernardi. I mean, he was a former Liberal senator. He's tried to start the Australian Conservatives, a few years ago, probably around the 2019 time frame. I think it was roughly around then. He only joined One Nation recently, and he's walked into this success. He's almost fallen into this. Suddenly he's almost like the opposition leader there in South Australia. How do you think he's feeling about this? And also tell us about Carlos, because we don't know too much about Carlos here on the eastern side of Australia. But he did a big thing by stepping aside and allowing Cory Bernardi to run ahead of him when he looked like he was going to be the top of the ticket all the way along. He's been elected as well, and I think rightfully so. So tell us about those two.
Yeah, and just before I do that, so the likely projection for the 22 seats of the Legislative Council looks like it's going to be Labor with 9 seats. Liberal will have 6 seats. One Nation, obviously 3. The Greens will have 2, and then you've got Fairgo, who was One Nation, Sarah Game, having the 1 seat, and the Independent there. So that doesn't give Labor a majority. Do
you think they'll work together?
Look, I think they have to, because ultimately, if there'll be a lot of people upset, including me, if they don't put their shit together and start working for the best interests of the people. If they can't work that out, there'll be
some animosity between Sarah Game, the way she left the party.
Look, I suspect there'll be a lot of disappointment, and that might be. But as adults, I think they need to get over it for the best interests of the people, right?
Adults, they're politicians.
Yeah, right. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, you won't just have the Labor Party or others having a go at them. You'll have people like me, people that want to see a difference, right? Now, the only way we're going to get a difference and push back on Labor is if Sarah Game and Carlos and all them work together. Because if they don't, then they're working against the best interests of the people in this states, and that's as far as. That's pretty much how I see it. So look, at the end of the day, they all need to play like big boys and girls and just get on with the job and put that stuff aside. And was it good? Was it a great thing that happened for either of them? No, but at some point you have to put differences aside for the betterment of the rest of the people that you're meant to be representing. And I think that's what it's all about. And unfortunately, this is what you've seen. Labor and Greens are so very good at that, and our side isn't, right? And that's why it's taken so long to get any sort of pushback, because they are just so well organised and oiled that they don't have a lot of that, and they keep probably a lot of the infighting behind the scenes. But getting back to go.
Yeah, it's just. I know you want to get to Cory, but for us here sitting in New South Wales, we look at Cory Bernardi and we see another Mark Latham. So I mean, do you think that someone like Cory Bernardi, who's always been a bit of a lone wolf, wanting to do his own thing, how's he going to survive now in being within One Nation and not always getting what he wants?
I think it's going to be really interesting, and I think we've got to remember the reason why Cory Bernardi ended up not being part of the Liberal Party. Obviously, the same-sex marriage debate was on at the moment, and we know how polarising all that was. And he's a strong Christian, stood by his convictions, and he made a comment that linked same-sex marriage to the slippery slope of what's next. Is a bestiality next? And lo and behold, I think at the end of the day, anybody that's been following South Australian politics knows about the Renmark High School scenario. scenario where a third-party provider was bringing up bestiality and intersex in incestuous relations in a classroom, and there's a court case going on. Now, I'm not saying that particular group is that way, but his concern that he was raising, putting it together, is clearly unfolded. The more you go away from these things in society and start opening up all sorts of aspects, it's going to go. People are going to want to try and push the boundaries, and it's about obviously trying to pull that together. So that's one of the reasons that he obviously got ousted from that. And then there was obviously the start with the Conservative, so which he obviously is, right? He's a Christian, he's a strong Christian, he's conservative. In regards to, I haven't met Corey myself. I don't know a lot about him personally. I do know that, speaking from others, though, he's clearly very politically savvy. Getting back to Carlos, he has always said from the word go, and I've had that chat with him, when a better person comes along, I will step aside, is what he's always said. Because for Carlos, he's seen the destruction of our economy, our building sector. He's a builder himself. He's got his own business. He employs people. He's on the ground. He talks to people. He listens to talkback radio. He hears all the conversations, and he wouldn't have thought of anything worse than going into politics, but he felt he had no option. So he jumped in there, but he always was of the view that if someone better comes along, then he'll step aside, and that's exactly what he did. And he was happy to take that number 2 spot. And Rebecca, and when I interviewed her and spoken to her, she was absolutely happy to step back down to the 3rd spot, so Corey could get into that first spot. Now, I'm not privy to all the conversations, obviously, that happened before that, and that he jumped in late, and the reasoning behind jumping in late. I suspect, though, that Corey, being quite politically savvy, has observed what's been happening, but also full credit to Carlos for when he was managing and being a coordinator for One Nation here in South Australia. A lot of that does sit with him, the success of them, because he set up a lot of the meetings, a lot of the quality people. He had the conversations for months before the election, and they stayed regimented, they stayed strict to their position. They had a lot of fire coming in, obviously, from the media, from opposition parties. They also had a lot of fire coming in, what was supposed to be friendly fire, so parties that are meant to be centre right, sort of conservative right, and they were taking pot shots. So One Nation, but they didn't retaliate. They just stuck to the course and stuck to what they were there for, which was sell the message of One Nation, what they were there for, and reach the people, the forgotten people, the people that weren't being listened to by Labor and Liberal. And clearly 22% of the South Australian population have gone, no, we like what you hear, regardless of. When you think about this, they had every direction. People were firing cannons at them from every single direction, and they still ended up picking up 22% of the vote here in this state. And this is even with Cory Bernardi's controversial, comments, remarks from all those years ago, which they decided to drag up in the media. So that tells you something. And now I think if they can be principled and they can be professional and put aside all the stuff that happened with and work with people like Sarah Game and others, I think they'll do a lot to damage the shiny coat of the Labor Party in this state.
So we're talking, we're celebrating the success of One Nation, because we're looking at it and go, well, they've finally broken through and they've got a lot of momentum. But you as a South Australian are still looking at another 4 years of a Labor government, and they can pretty much pass whatever legislation they want. I mean, how do you feel about that side of things? Yes, there's a silver lining with the One Nation story, but the reality is you got another Labor government that you're going to have to deal with.
Look, I'm pretty personally pretty gutted, just because obviously I'm a conservative Christian, right? And when you have a political party like the Labor Party, who calls themselves centrists, but then on their how to vote card preferences the Greens Party, 31 in 31 electorates out of 47, and then puts them third and fourth beyond that, it really makes you wonder. The bed buddies that they put them, that they have, and their philosophy and their social social ideals. I shared this, before when I did all the numbers of the how to vote cards. I went through them all and had a look, and Labor put the Greens 31 times in their how to vote cards. Now, that concerns me about where their ideology sits. Now, tongue in cheek, I throw it out there and say that they're socialists. They're the party of socialism, which people chuck.
It's not tongue in cheek.
Well, they
in this country, in a socialist country.
Well, that's right. If you look at the federal seat and all that, but then other people will chuck it back at you and say, well, look, they've got the AUKUS deal. I think it's about 13% of this state is public sector. You've still got 80% or so is private enterprise and so forth. So people say, how can you call them, socialist? But it's their lean, it's their bent. They were the ones that instigated the under 16 social media ban. Now, I feel strongly about that. I believe that should be in the parents' realm. As I said, them and Liberals, increased the powers of the Emergency Management Act. This COVID style era stuff that sort of linked in, and I've spoken about it before, I think even on your podcast, linked into the international health regulations, and kind of put those Emergency Management Act on steroids. Now, it really concerns me that they've got this much of a majority of seats again. But look, to be honest, I've got to, and I'd like to put it out to other people and we'll see what they think. But here's a little bit of my thought. I think people from the Liberal Party, obviously there was people that jumped to One Nation. But I think there's a lot of people that really like the security of a party in power, that even though it's not the best, they'd rather that than the unknown of, say, One Nation. I think a lot of people are still held back of going towards a populist party like One Nation, especially with all the rhetoric and the attacks from the media and other parties about how racist One Nation is and all this sort of stuff, because that mud sticks. So I feel that it's not a true representation of how many people actually love Labor. I think it's just that Liberals are dead. They're dead in the water. They're Titanic. They're taking on water and going down further and further. And I don't think people had enough confidence still to put their weight behind One Nation. So they took the comfortable position of going with Labor, and that's what I'm hoping for. But you've got to remember, we're in massive amount of debt, and it's continuing to build. As I said, over $2.6 million a day on interest payments just on the debt that we hold, and that's meant to go even further. They claim that the AUKUS deal is this fantastic thing. We're talking, maybe 5 to 20,000 people employed in as a result of that. But there's 1 million people employed in this state, and we got like 1.8, nearly 2 million people. I mean, sure, that benefits a certain portion, but it doesn't benefit the whole state. You continue to push the country or the state into debt, it's going to come and get you. It's going to bite you in the bum eventually, right? You can't spend other people's money forever without it coming back to you, and unfortunately, that's where they're at. But it's good. It's also good to reflect that Labor has actually been in power here in South Australia over the last 80 years, predominantly over Liberal. They've jockeyed, obviously Liberal, under Playford were in for a long period of time. Then there was some changes in regards to the elections, how the elections were run. I think the term was gerrymandering, something like that. I'm not 100% on board with that, but overall, over the 80 years, Labor has been in power in this state. So it is traditionally, a Labor state. But unfortunately, I think the days we live in now, Labor is influenced by far more than what it was. Back in the day, it was obviously the party of the worker and everything else like that. But I think the tide's shifted on that a lot, and people are saying, well, they're actually really not the party of the worker anymore, because a lot of the people or the working class jumped across to One Nation. So it's a really interesting. Of course, am I concerned about the next 4 years or what they're going to do. I mean, clearly we have so much evidence about the climate. Bill Gates has pulled back on it, saying it's not as catastrophic as it was. You talk heavily with Katie and others in regards to the new renewable transition, so you're fully versed on this. Yet South Australia is going now. Obviously, they've got the mandate to continue this push towards net zero 2027, adding a massive continued cost, and then possibly making our energy supply security, putting that on the edge even further. So it's really interesting that they're able to still attract that many votes, even though there's so much more information coming out of it. But as I said, I think part of it is that people just didn't know where else to put their vote. Do you go for a populist party like One Nation? Do you go for a drowning Liberal Party? Or do you give it to Labor? All right, because as we see, it didn't even go to Greens. Even with Labor, on their how to vote cards preferencing Greens, they've ended up with 0 lower house seats, which I'm ecstatic about, to be honest. But they've still got a couple there in the Legislative Council. So look, it's really interesting times. We've got to remember it's not doom and gloom. We've just got to make sure that we're holding this government to account, because they have got more of a socialist leaning, and I'm not that, right? So I'm sort of so I speak for the other side, but clearly there's enough South Australians that obviously put them into power as a majority. And that's democracy, and we've got to go, well, that is the way it is. The people have spoken, so to speak, 37% of them anyway, as first preferences. But, we've just got to hunker down and hold them to account on anything that they continue to do moving forward. And look, I think when people start hurting enough, the tide may change.
See, you mentioned the Liberal Party being dead, and there was some hope that the Liberals were resurging in Victoria. But now that we've seen this with Moira Deeming, I suspect that that support for the Liberals is going to recede, and One Nation's probably going to benefit from it even again. So we're almost at the beginning of the end of the Liberal Party and the start of the beginning for One Nation. So there's a saying in politics, you never punch down, and I think that's been the case with the major parties, with how they handle One Nation or how they've handled them in the past. Obviously, there's pot shots here and there, but we're seeing a lot more attacks on them on social media. They're definitely starting to take a lot more notice of One Nation and being critical of One Nation and treating, and Labor specifically is treating them more of as an opposition now, more than just a minor party. And I think they can see what's coming, and their polling's probably indicating what's coming. One of the examples is from this guy called Andrew Lee. Now, Andrew Lee is a member of the lower house in Canberra. He represents a seat in the Australian Capital Territory. Surprise, surprise. And he put out this video. Let's have a look.
You might be hearing more about Pauline Hanson and One Nation lately. But if you're a young man thinking about your future, it's worth asking one simple question. What are you actually signing up for? First, climate. One Nation want to scrap net zero, build 3 more coal-fired power stations, and pull out.
Yeah, do it right now. We're meant to be upset about this.
Get the nuclear reactors pumping, mate.
I got a comment here from Richard Storch. Andrew Lee is a massive wanker. Yes.
Yeah, good on you, Richard. Don't hold back. You never hold back, Richard. Good on you.
It's not just about our environment. It's about the jobs available to young Aussies. Second, migration. One Nation want to massively slash migration, including skilled migration. That means Aussie firms won't have access to the workers they need to build houses, look after sick people, or grow the economy. All things that make Australia better.
Look, I think a lot of people are watching this one going, yeah, another tick for One Nation. Look, I mean, who's he speaking? Is he trying to persuade people away from the party or towards the party? I
think more towards the party. Is like almost a Build Back Better theme there with this guy.
Yeah.
Health. One Nation wants to get rid of the National Medicines Regulator that checks that drugs and vaccines are safe. That's a huge risk to health, and it poses the danger that dodgy companies will put unsafe medicines on our shelves. Fourth, social policy. One Nation want to wind back abortion access. That's a throwback to an old era where government told women what they could do with their own bodies. And fifth, tariffs. One nation wants to increase taxes on imports. That'd drive up the cost of computers, phones, cars, and everyday gear, increasing inflation and putting a cost of living squeeze on everyday Australians. Politics is about choices. One nation are trying to make you angry to get your vote. But before you fall for their cheap trick, it's worth asking the question, are their policies going to make your future bigger or smaller?
Authorised by Andrew Lee ALP, Gungahlin Place, Gungahlin.
Well, look, I mean, I think the Labor Party are making Australians angry and the Liberal Party are making Australians angry, not One Nation. But this is his website. I mean, you can see, he's you can see that photo of him there, smiling. Andrew Lee, his name. Now, prior to being elected in 2010, he was a professor of economics at the Australian National University, and he holds a PhD in public policy from Harvard, having graduated from Sydney University with a first-class honours in arts and law. Andrew is a past recipient of the Economic Society of Australia's Young Economist Award and a fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences. Now, that sounds all very impressive, but nothing that I see there indicates that he's worked in the real world and had a real job and understands the pressures that Australian people are under. But this guy, I mean, I don't know anything about him, but when I look at him, I look at photos of him, he reminds me of walking into a second-hand car dealership, and they're going to rip you off. You don't want to deal with these people, and you can't trust them. But you see him walk up first, and he's like, "I'm definitely not dealing with you. Like you are. I can't trust you as far as I can throw you." And you go and try and find someone else to deal with. That's the impression that I get from this guy. I mean, what about you when you see this video, Mark? Do you think he's persuading anyone away from One Nation by putting this clip out?
Probably only the people that voted to get him, elected in where he's sitting now. But at the end of the day, it just smells and reeks of desperation, and that's all I see. Is that to the lengths that you would go to put that together, to have him, undermine One Nation, to specifically take time out to put a video together, undermine One Nation, just smells of fear, and that's all that is to me. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I'd be surprised if the people that elected him into that position haven't now turned around and said, you know what, we're going to One Nation. Thanks. I think One Nation probably saying thanks for giving us extra votes. I mean, how ridiculous is that guy? Professor of economics. I'd love to see him have a chat with Gerard Rennick.
That's the thing, Mark. I mean, that's the secret that Labor don't want you to know. Labor do bleed a lot of votes to One Nation. So he's almost encouraging a lot of Labor people that are sitting on the fringes going, hey, maybe I should check out One Nation policies. I mean, they do have a lot of policies. They say One Nation doesn't have policies. No, they do have very good policies. I've always said that One Nation have very good policies, in my opinion. So he's almost endorsing people to check out One Nation even more.
The other thing I picked up on that is, I mean, he's Labor, and he mentioned about economic prosperity. He was talking about tariffs and all that sort of stuff. Now, Labor and Liberal, right? And this is one of the big things that I'm really hot about, and I share this a lot. Recently, now we've got to remember that over the last decades, Labor and Liberal have been at the seat, have been at the helm of this ship, while they've decimated our manufacturing. They've pushed it overseas. Obviously started with the nice idea of the Lima Agreement, which obviously was going to help third world countries out of the poo and get their manufacturing going, but it helped decimate us. Then obviously shook hands and embraced the idea of globalization and working with groups, international groupthink that think they have the best interests of the world at heart. We're talking, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, all these groups and think tanks that get together and they come up with all these grand policies, which eventually start trickling down to us here in Australia at the local government level, at the state level, and the federal level. And it's really about what's in the best interests of the world, but let's undermine everything that's important to Australians. And this is why I think people are starting to push back on this whole nationalism idea, this sovereignty. Let's put Australia first. Let's look at what we can do in our own backyard. We have all the resources in the world to be fully self-sustained. We've always punched above our weight. You know, even in world wars, we had a very small population. Our diggers were renowned for always punching above their weight. Everything we do, with building, with manufacturing, with ingenuity, Australians have that, but they decimated that for us. They were at the helm to do that, and I think people are seeing a party like One Nation is actually saying, no, screw that. We're not having that anymore. We're going to start focusing on Australia, on Australians, and Australians' well-being, and our manufacturing, and our make everything here in Australia and be reliant on us. And let's start getting some money for our resources as well while we're at it. Damn it! Like seriously, you know, we're giving away our stuff virtually and not getting enough for it. We've got other smaller nations have got massive sovereign wealth funds and everything. And what have they done? They've sold us out all these resources. And I mean, I don't have the answers. I don't have the economic mind to say, well, let's how do we do that here in Australia? But there is some very smart people that can do that. And as I mentioned, Gerard Rennick's one of them, and others. We need to be taking some of the power off Labor and Liberal. And you know, you and I have both been involved in Australians for Better Government. We know that there's some very inept ministers, you know, that have positions over portfolios that ought not to be there. And we should be looking at people that can actually do the job effectively instead of the ones that we have now. It's really time for change, and that's why I keep saying that Australians need change. They're yearning for change, and I think it is starting to show. Even though you know we've had a good result here for Labor, they can probably sit there and go, look at us, look at the seats we've got. With 37% of the primary. But what I'm saying to Labor here in South Australia and the rest of the country is, don't feel too comfortable. The tide of dissent is rising. So you don't sit on your complacency.
We spoke of Labor's reaction, and this is the Greens' reaction, of course. And of course, we have to go to Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. Let's hear what she had to say.
One Nation lied to the South Australian people during this election campaign. They lied about where their preferences were going. They told South Australians to just vote one, and that their preferences would just sit with One Nation. Of course, now we know that they were secretly directing preferences without anybody knowing. They lied to their voters straight up. They lied about the preferences they were receiving. They got preferences from the Liberal Party, despite the fact that Mr. Barnaby Joyce, lied twice on television, again yesterday, to say no one was preferencing them.
Senator Hanson-Young, you're referring to a member of the other place, and you've used a term that is being found to be disorderly in this place. I'll ask you to withdraw, please.
I withdraw.
Thank you.
Mr. Joyce misled people when he said that One Nation got no preferences. They got preferences from the Liberal Party. One Nation lied about who their candidates were. They lied that one of their candidates had an arrest warrant out on him for sex charges in the UK. They've been caught lying from day dot. They defrauded electoral funds in New South Wales. They lied about that. They have lied about how they love this country, because this country, Australia, is a country that they seem to not like very much at all. Because Australia is a country that is multicultural, that has beautiful environment, that has a community rich of diversity. And yet every time One Nation mounts their hate and division, they are lying about how much they love it. They don't like this country very much at all. They wish it was different. That is the biggest lie of all.
Thank you.
I mean, this is Rich coming from.
They refused to stand next to the Australian flag, and she's talking about One Nation hating Australia. I mean, what's your reaction to this?
Look, absolutely. I mean, look, the Greens are the party that they hate. They want division. They're for all the all the divisionary, everything that seeks to cause fracture and division in this country is what the Greens stand for, and they continue to push back on that. And need I say more about the results? How many lower house seats did you get there, Sarah, in South Australia here? And sure, you got one extra person there to sit up there. But getting back to her point about the preferences and lying and that, as far as I know, and as far as I'm aware, the voter preferences where their votes go, right?
Yeah.
One Nation had their how to vote cards had a 1, and they said you vote, and on there it had a note on there, you vote for the next person that you want in order after us, but you put us there because you own the preferences. And I'm pretty hot on this myself. I actually want, and we talk about this with Australians for Better Government.
Mark, just for context, the Teals do exactly the same thing in federal elections. They put 1 and then they put question marks in every other box. So I don't understand how One Nation was deceiving their voters by just putting a 1 and not numbering the other boxes. Hey, it's up to the voter to allocate their preferences, not the party. And there's this thing about, there was a form put in by the One Nation Party to the Electoral Commission saying, well, if someone does put the 1 there, then we want the preferences to go here. Well, apparently every party fills that in, and it's a requirement. It's just a natural process. But this is one of the things. People like Sarah Hanson-Young want to blow this up into a big issue and conflate it, and it's nothing. And they're just trying to take pot shots at One Nation wherever they can when they can't really attack them on anything credible.
Yeah, and there was another political party in South Australia that was doing exactly the same thing, and really hammering that point home. We're really concerned about that because One Nation stuck to their guns and didn't want to do preference deals with anybody because they didn't want to do that. So everybody got their knickers in a knot and said, well, One Nation's not playing with me in the sandpit. I'm going to take my bat and ball and go home, and I'm going to start throwing mud at them. At the end of the day, the thing is that you and I both know we want the voters to be more educated. We want the voters to really be involved in the electoral process, and I don't actually, I reckon throw the how to vote cards away. Educate the voter. They own the vote. They own the preferences. They should be so well informed that they should number their candidates in order of how they sit ideologically. To me, it makes no sense that you'd vote One Nation at number 1 and then even consider putting, say, the Greens at number 2, right? Most sensible voters wouldn't vote that way. They go, well, who is most aligned? If I'm putting One Nation number 1, who am I most aligned with next under One Nation, right? And you put that in order, and you put the party that you're most diametrically opposed to at the bottom, and it's a no-brainer. But to come around and say that they've defrauded their voters or they misled their voters or the people that voted for them, I think, look, and as we saw, 22% of the people, the votes that One Nation got, I'm pretty sure that the One Nation voters were pretty well astute on who they were going to vote for. So I think that doesn't wash, and I think it's just taken pot shots, really silly pot shots by her there. And as far as I'm concerned, good riddance. Got no lower house seats, and I'd like to see him. We'd like to see him in the dustbin of history eventually, anyway. So that's just me.
Yeah. Look, mate, we're running out of time, and we're going to try and squeeze a little bit more out of you. Hopefully, I know you got kids to put to bed, but I just want to play this clip quickly. It's of Pauline Hanson speaking back in 2021 about Australia's fuel security and how we're meant to have a 90-day fuel supply. This is playing out in real time now. And I just want to play this because a lot of people are saying the success of One Nation is due to the fact that Pauline has always stuck to her guns. She's always raised issues that seem to have played out the way that she's said they would. And this is lending a lot of credibility towards Pauline and towards the One Nation Party. So let's play this clip. I'll get your thoughts quickly, and then we'll wrap things up.
The Senate, in 2016, I raised the importance of fuel security for all Australians. This government and previous have continuously failed to meet the internationally mandated 90-day stockpile of fuel for the people of this nation. That means this government has put at risk the fuel security for our daily transport needs, our defence, our aviation industry, our mining, and our commuter needs. Without this internationally mandated 90-day stockpile of fuel, Australia risks coming to a grinding halt.
So this is her speaking in the Parliament, as I said, in 2021, so 5 years ago. This is what we're dealing with right now. Both Labor and Liberal governments haven't done anything about this, and we're looking at fuel shortages now, and even potentially lockdowns, working 4 days a week, as some of the state premiers are starting to allude to. I mean, what do you think about this, Mark? Do you think this just lends more credibility to what Pauline Hanson has been saying for decades now?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people are very critical of Pauline and saying that, she's that One Nation in general is a Liberal Party, satellite or whatever they want to call it. I don't think so. I think she's been very open and upfront and pushing back on this sort of stuff over the decade. And at the end of the day, the chickens have come home to roost now, though, haven't they? So she is calling that out. It's openly, it's on Hansard, it's on the public record. She's calling it out. Liberal and Labor won't take any responsibility for leaving our country in the state it's in. I mean, these are the people that are paid massive amounts of dollars a year to represent us as a party, and they become too complacent. And this is, again, I talk back to what I talked about before about selling our nation away for globalization and not thinking ahead for the future of this nation. We wouldn't be in this position if they had been thinking Australia first and thinking about all these things. Now, if you had sensible people in Parliament, like we often talk about, ministers with life experience and world experience, not just listening to, these reports put together for politicians to make decisions. If you had genuine people that had real lived world experience in the place that could make decisions, we wouldn't be in this position, and we would have been well and truly still having our manufacturing, still having our oil production, everything. As I said, our country can be fully self-sustained, but they sold us down the river. And kudos to Pauline. I think it does add a bit of credibility, and it should hopefully make people jump on board even further and give them the chance. What are you going to do? All these people bagging that might be on our side, bagging Pauline because maybe she voted didn't vote in a way that you wanted her to vote, and she voted with Liberals on this or that. Do you want the continuation of Labor and Liberal jockeying to further ruin this country, or do you want to take a potluck chance on this movement that's growing and say let's give this a go and see where it leads us? Do you think it could be that much worse than what we've currently got? I don't think so. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but we're in this mess because we've had Liberals and Labor managing this country for decades, and look where we are now. We're totally reliant on the international markets.
Yeah, mate, I got another 100 questions to ask you, but I know we've got to wrap things up. So my final question is, I guess the whole theme of this podcast. What does this mean for Australia now that One Nation's success is not just hype? It looks to be real, and looks like they're on the resurgence. Where do we go to as a country from here, and where does this lead?
Well, I think the thing is that we've got to continue to push back and do, like you and I and others. We need to be the media. We need to push out the mainstream media that are pushing this out and pushing back on parties like One Nation and this whole narrative around they're just a far right party that hates immigrants, which is the narrative that's shaped. I'm pretty sure as people get to really find out more about One Nation and the people that are actually run with it here, especially here in South Australia. I mean, I know quite a few of those people personally. They're good, decent, everyday Australians that are just wanting to make a difference. They've seen how much the country's been damaged and the state's been damaged by the other parties. So what they need to be doing is recruiting properly. One Nation needs to sort out the democratic process within its party. I know that's been one of Gerard Rennick's thorn in his sides about working. He hasn't totally dismissed working with One Nation and talking with them and possibly having something in the future. But one of the key things I hear all the time is the democratic structure of the One Nation party. Now, if they get that fixed and that's done properly and effectively, and there's some sort of board structure or some sort of proper structure, I think there'll be a massive force to reckon with. And look, if you could get people like Gerard Rennick, even Alex Antich and others, possibly Moira Deeming now all working with them. I'd love to see Jacinta Namatjima-Price and others also, maybe consider it into the future. I mean, that'd be a force of a party, because I don't see a future for the Liberal Party, no matter how much people are trying to, put the defibrillators on it to keep it alive. But I do have hopes, and it really comes around how they can. Now that they're growing, they've got branches. They've got a branch in South Australia. They're looking at branches everywhere. Is how well that's managed, because yourself what ultimately happens when the party grows. You're going to start getting infiltrators, people that are looking to damage it from the inside, and we've seen that. That's what's happened with the Liberal Party, right? The Liberal Party we didn't get to this place for nothing with the Liberal Party, right? It is done by deceit. It's done by stealth, and that is one of the things that I think One Nation has to be careful of as it's growing, and get the right people and stick to the principles of why they were formed. I mean, who would have ever thought when the Liberal Party of Menzies was formed all the way back then, that it would be what it is today? And that's essentially what I'm saying to One Nation is, as you grow, as you get bigger, don't ever think that there won't be people trying to undermine your success and what you're trying to do, because that's what's happening in our world all the time.
Yeah. Now, Mark has a very, very good podcast. It's called Faith, Culture, Politics. You can go to fcpaustralia.com and check out his website and all his great podcasts. He's also starting to do, with myself, but predominantly himself at times as well, podcasts on the Australians for Better Government YouTube channel as well. So hopefully we have some more news about that in the coming weeks. But Mark, it's been a pleasure as always to get your insight and your comments, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. Pity we couldn't have gone a little bit longer, but I know you got a family, and so do I. But before I let you go, I'm pretty sure I haven't done this with you yet. You might correct me if I have, but there's a segment on this show. It's the most important segment. It's called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, Mark, I'm going to put you in charge of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 or 6 people, living or dead, don't have to be politicians, but people that you think can lead this country in the right direction in the next Parliament. 5 or 6 people. Who do you choose, Mark?
Look, I'd have to say, Gerard Rennick would have to be right on the top of that. As I said, Alex Antage, Jacinta Namatjima-Price, I'd put on there. Have a lot of time and respect for her. Look, I'd have to say, even people like Corey Bernardi. I think as much as he's had a lot of flack, Barnaby Joyce has got to have a seat in there as well. It's a tough one. I mean, there's so many, but I think, if you're looking at conservative-wise, I think even, Moira Deeming, who's put herself out there, and Matt Canavan has got to get a look in as well. So even though he's been a bit critical and he's had pot shots at Pauline, and since becoming leader of the Nationals, but look, he's stayed true to course and pushed back on a lot of the junk that the other party. So Matty Canavan's got to get a seat in there as well, I reckon.
Look, I think things are swirling around to where they're meant to be ultimately. So even though you do get a few people like, the divide between Rennick's people and One Nation is very interesting. I don't know why there's so much hostility there. It seems silly when you'd think that those people are more closely aligned. Like, I always think back to the UAP in One Nation. Yeah, we were separate parties, but we got on very well. There was no animosity, where it's very strange that it's the opposite with Gerard Rennick's people and One Nation. But it does seem like more and more people are coming together in the right direction, and it's coming at the expense of the Liberal Party. But look, we're going to have more opportunities to talk about that in the coming weeks and years. But for now, I guess we're just watching with our popcorn and seeing how it all plays out, and trying to contribute where we can. As I said, Mark is Vice President of Australians for Better Government, and will be doing a lot more work there in the coming weeks and months and years. And he also has a very good podcast, Faith, Culture and Politics in Australia. Check out his website. And thank you so much, Mark, for coming on. I really appreciate it tonight.
No, pleasure. It's been good. Enjoy the chat, and really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you and this platform, mate, and continue to work with you. So, and thanks for all the people that have been watching as well. So appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.